Pecha Kucha 315 production concerns. So really the thing I'll be talking about this week is like transitioning from the first issue to the second issue of my next storyboard draft of my manga, and just kind of getting hit in the feels with how unpleasant it is to keep going. But in relation to the bison I did last week on my Tuesday bison, I just kind of got that calligraphy pen out. I liked, did a close-up portrait angle of Bison with his two main gals. And it's loose, it's sloppy, but it feels to me like it's more the kind of thing that I usually do than what I did last week. I'm not even saying it's better, I'm just saying that it doesn't make me feel like somehow it was inappropriate. So at least there's that win for this week. But basically, as I was starting to kind of do my composition edit for this storyboard, where I'm actually looking at the paneling, I'm thinking about the angles, I'm getting closer to the finished art composition and art style. I'm having to jump through too many hoops at the same time because so many things are still quite unclear. And the start of the second issue is talking about the topography and the geography and the political history of the world in passing, and so few of these things I've actually pinned down. It's very unpleasant to actually try and finalize something that's still mostly incomplete in my head. Like, the thing that really tripped me up this week is just the idea of like this little world map thing I've got going on. Can you even have mountains on a coastline? Is that how continents are formed? I mean, am I being crazy for this? And it's like, it turns out you can, but it's an unusual thing. But these are one of the many things you got to think about when you're putting together something you don't want to be embarrassing in the future. And speaking of putting things together, what I decided to do this week after that was go back to the first issue and see if I couldn't just try and tease out a more complete version of that. So I started messing around with Clip Studio Paint's manga paneling tools that let you kind of control page flow, which is awkward in its own right. And then I was actually having to come to terms with the way I use my tools, the amount of zooming in I need to do to feel like I can get the accuracy I want without screwing up the compositions, because I need to zoom in a lot to make it comfortable for my hand. But when you zoom in too much, you make mistakes that you can't see with your eye, because it's like sticking your face right on in front of a piece of paper. You lose context. I was also trying to come to terms with background details, just like sticking, bits of wood on the ceiling. And how would I actually go about drawing that? Which reminds me, I need to think about the perspective tool more often. And then there's the big elephant in the room, is it's this idea that because it's a manga, I'm going to simplify the art instead of actually trying to draw as best I can, but then stylize it. And I think the best way for me to go forward is to simply try and draw all of this as well as I can, and then maybe to retroactively simplify just the faces, because mangaka are actually very talented artists. But I've got some perspective things in here. I've got a lot of detail stuff, a lot of pattern and design stuff that's going to need to be addressed. So really, I think what I need to do while going forward is not think of this as the final storyboard before I start inking, but just give myself the time to do everything I need to do. So at this point, I switched to the G pen to start trying to actually pin down like some of the most important characters for the first half of the book, and also figure out how to draw them in the panels with the speech bubbles taking up the space. And this is a great example of the text is in the way of the image. I can edit that, that's fine. Japanese speech bubbles are usually more vertical than horizontal, so that's something that can be addressed. And also, this was at the point where I start to felt like I'm comfortable messing around with the G pen. It's letting me get the art direction I want, but the line quality is abominable. But the point is that there needs to be, I think, 3 separate versions of each of these images so that I can focus on the composition, focus on the art direction, focus on the actual production of the lines as a vector layer that can be edited and things like that. And by trying to do this all now, I'm jumping the fact that I haven't actually sorted out the details for me to pretty up. I'm also still reading a little bit of that H.P. Lovecraft book, story by story. Most of the stories are very short. I take some of the core narrative things in a 3-page story, and then I draw them for my own amusement to see what I end up with. There's no point in me explaining what this crazy shit is, because that's kind of the thing with a H.P. Lovecraft book. What he typically does is explain. It's usually from first person. Some guy's explaining, oh, I saw something that's completely unexplainable and it was really disturbing. Also, I have no details for you. And that's why the stories are typically very, very short, in my experience. I also saw Parasite, a very well-known Korean movie that was recommended to me a couple of years ago. And just like the guy said to me, I'm not going to say anything except you should see it. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's very intriguing. It's a very interesting film. You'll get out of it what you'll get out of it, but I think you'll enjoy it. And I'm not really going to talk about what I read this week. It's just another one of books from my catalogue, my personal collection, Transformers Megatron Origin, which ironically is not the origin of Megatron. It's more the origin of the Decepticons. But really, all I'll say is that in comparison to Midnighter that I read last week, it was a story that clearly had a very easy to understand narrative direction with clear goodies and baddies, very strong art, although a little confusing at times, but it would have been a great movie. It would have been a great TV show. It was easy to follow, and it had a satisfactory flow and feeling and conclusion, even though it has an open-ended conclusion. Midnight had none of those things, and it's nice to have something to compare it to directly that reminds me that I'm not just being hard on this book because I have a chip on my shoulder for some reason. It's like, no, compared to other things I've read, and I wouldn't call Megatron Origins exceptional in any way, shape, or form, except that it's solid, and Midnighter wasn't, and that's a shame, because I still think that as a bootleg Batman, you could do something with that. But that's the end of Pecha Kucha 315, and I'll see you next time.